Hey, global leader and expatriates. Welcome to Joyride with Expatriates. If this is your first time hearing this show, we talk every month with a different person so that they can share their experiences abroad, how to manage cultural competence, and how to become an effective individual while living abroad. Hi, I'm Tatyana Fittipaldi, and in this channel, we make videos to help global leaders just like you gain the right skill set to make impactful business decisions and become effective, inclusive, and influential. Today, we have the pleasure of talking with Steve Douglas. Steve Douglas was born in the US. He's a doctoral candidate at Drake University with a focus on organizational culture in multinational corporations. He's retired after a 30-year military career in the US Army. He's married and he is proud dad of 3 adult children. He and his wife live in Iowa with their dog Josh and cat Kitty Cat. Please join me in welcoming Steve to our show. Steve, welcome to our show. It's so good to have you here. Thank you so much for coming.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. This is a great thrill for me.
Thank you. So I am really excited, as I told you offline, I'm really excited because you relocated with the military, and that's a big difference between, corporations and relocations with the corporate. So I was hoping that you could share with us how your relocation with the military. Well, so tell a little bit about that. And what do you see as difference between relocating as a military and relocating as an executive, for example?
Well, thank you. Yeah, that's a great question. In the military, the military community is geared towards relocation. When you receive your orders to your transfer orders, that's the start of your transition from your work day to transitioning to I'm moving my household goods to my new duty station. The infrastructure exists there. So let's take, for example, if you're relocating to another country, then the process of moving your household goods and your family is pretty much the same as if you're relocating in the States. However, when you get to your new duty location, your new duty station, there's no mystery as far as where your medical treatment facilities are, where you're going to buy your groceries. You don't have to worry about how you're going to pay for, your medicines and that kind of thing. It's all taken care of. Now,
in what sense? It's in the base?
Yes. Or exactly where it's going to be. And when you get to your new duty station, your unit has assigned a sponsor to you, someone who's lived, that is another service member, and they're going to help you,
like a mentor kind of thing.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's great.
They're going to give you a heads up on all that stuff. Now, that ease of access does have a downside, and that is it makes it too easy for people to not go out and explore a new culture.
Integrate.
Yeah, there are, and it's, which I feel is kind of a shame, because I know of service members and their families that, no, I don't want to go out. I'm going to spend all my time on post. And I'm thinking, well, that's kind of a shame, but it's very possible that you can do that. So, I think it's really, that makes it nice for, service members. The challenge becomes for our civilian counterparts, because when you find out that you are going to an expat assignment, it's not really clear. I've heard stories where expats the company has provided, oh yeah, we'll find a place for you to live. Okay, well, what about the other services? Oh, yeah, we'll find you a place to live, and then we'll worry about that when you get there. Well, that's kind of difficult because, unless you are fluent in the language, that there's going to be a problem. Where do you buy your groceries? Where do you get medical, treatment? How do how do you drive? Are there things that you need to be concerned with? So that I see as being the big difference, because where relocation for expats is, they're kind of the exception, rather than in the military, where that's part of the being in the military. You're going to receive orders, you're going to a new duty location. And the interesting part is, whether you go to an overseas, or we call it OCONUS, for outside of the continental United States, whether it's an OCONUS move or a CONUS move, when you get to your new unit, you still have a sponsor that's going to help you, because there are some differences in, hey, the post hospital, that you have to go to this location if you're, for immediate care. Okay, so those are the little things, but they're still there to help you transition into your new location. So I think that's an important difference, but that's also one way that companies can help, is make sure there's somebody on the other side. And we'll talk about that here in a little bit too. So.
And Steve, one question. So these other people, so the hostels, the grocery, these other people that work and helped in the transition, are they also in the military, or they're contractors from abroad? How does that work?
Yes, to all of the above. That chances are they are retirees, military retirees. They are dependents, wives, husbands of the service members, their children. And there are some folks that are local, that, from the host nation, and they all speak English. So that's another thing. When you go to, the hospital, because, you're taking your little one sick at 2:00 in the morning, you don't have to worry about the language barrier, because all of the medical treatment, the staff they speak English, they're Americans. And that's the same way when you go to the grocery store. So you might be able to purchase some of the unique food items from, that country, which is a cool thing. However, you can ask somebody, so what is this? Whereas an expat can go into a grocery store and go, I have no idea what I'm shopping for here. I can't read a label. So that's a big challenge right there. So great question.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And do you guys know beforehand how long, the expatriation the relocation will happen? Or we're going to be deployed for 2 years, 3 years, or do you know this up front, or how does it work?
Yes. When you go to an overseas assignment, and it depends upon the location. If you are accompanied, in other words, you're moving your dependents with you, and you're going to Europe, it's going to be, now this might have changed, but based upon when I was in, it was expected that you were going to spend 3 years in, over in Europe, wherever that is, Italy, Germany, wherever. If you were unaccompanied going into Germany, you were going to be there, I believe it was 2 years. And if you went to Korea unaccompanied, it was 1 year, but that is, well, there's some caveats to that. But overall, you're going to be, you have a pretty good idea of how long you're going to be at your overseas location. Yes.
And how do you think this can impact your willingness or openness to integrate locally? How by knowing that, well, I'll go back in 3 years anyway.
A lot of people, not everybody wants to stay sequestered on post. They want to go out and they want to visit. An awful lot of times people will have a strong desire, as we called it, live on the economy. And that is you are not in military housing. You are living in the community. And, it's a full on experience. You still have, all of the nice things, medical treatment,
The support.
English speaking. Yep. All of that support is there. However, you're going to have a host nation landlord, and you're going to have host nation neighbors, and they may or may not like Americans. And so you're going to have a full experience on that one.
That's
So yeah.
interesting.
And a lot of people say, yep, I love it. That's the only way I'm going to go. And a lot of people will, they'll go to Germany, and they have the opportunity. They fall in love with the country. They fall in love with the people. They'll come back to the United States, have a CONUS assignment for 3 years, and then they'll say, you know what, send me back. I want to go there. And there's some folks that say, you know what, I've got a couple of minutes, I've got a couple of more months, and I'm going to be retiring, so I'm staying right here. And so that
Really,
happens quite
that's
frequently.
interesting. Yeah,
Yes.
that's really interesting.
Yep. So that's part of it. So yeah.
And so you had international deployments with the military, and we talked offline that now you are working on your PhD for,
Yes.
with organizational culture. Tell us a little bit about that, and why do you think this is important? Why did you decide to, focus on that for your PhD?
You bet. There was a Brazilian company that I heard about when I was in grad school. It was called Simco, or Grupo Simco. And I found it interesting because they had self-directed work teams. And as I did a little research on the company, I thought to myself, well, a company just doesn't announce one day, oh, we're going to have self-directed work groups. And I started asking myself, okay, so what was in the local culture that allowed that transition to occur? Because the company, you would expect self-directed, oh, that's not going to go well. They prospered and they've diversified. So they were just manufacturing repair parts for ocean-going vessels. Now they're in, last I saw, like financial services. So it was very, very impressive. And I thought, well, what was it that allowed that to happen? And then I started looking at organizations and saying, okay, so why do some corporations, why can they do that? How do they work with the local culture, especially when it comes time for foreign acquisitions or mergers? And so that's really what prompted my research. And my research question is, how does a multinational corporation instill their organizational culture into a foreign subsidiary? And I'm doing that from the perspective of expatriate managers, because they're going to have an understanding of the company's culture, which and in my definition, it is it is shared learning. It's not, it goes so much deeper than, well, that's how we do business. No, culture is shared learning that works well enough that's what you pass along to other people. Okay. Well, when you have a manager that goes to another country, well, sometimes the organizational culture won't mix well with the with the host nation employees. So how do they do that? And so, my perspective is, so the leader member exchange between the expatriate manager and the local employees, as well as the exchange between the expat manager and their boss back in the United States.
Yes, back in the headquarters.
Yep, back at the headquarters. And so, I'm looking at that and I'm going, ooh, Well, that's kind of interesting. There are some dynamics that happen there where it's, you can't just look at an expat and say, oh, well, but they're a manager and they're going to be happy there. Not necessarily. So that's where I'm really interested in is there what level of support does an expat manager need to have so that they can be successful
In
when
this
they are.
assignment.
Yep. So I'm looking at it from that perspective as well as the stakeholders, the local employees as well as other individuals, the government, what the people that you need to interact with to be successful in that assignment. So that's kind of the framework that I'm looking at, because a lot of, well, there's a high probability that a merger or an acquisition is not going to return the investment that they're hoping for. There's about 80% chance that that's not going to happen. And there's about a 50% chance that it's actually going to lose money. And the biggest contributor, according
During
to
a time frame or overall, you mean?
Yeah, overall. So, and when you have, and the biggest contributing factor is culture.
Oh, that's interesting.
So, I'm looking at, well, you have to
You
have
mean the cultural clash between the merger
Yes.
and I see.
Yes, because in the United States we have that attitude of, oh, well, come on, we speak English, they speak English, so this will be easy. No, it's not, because what English are we going to speak? That was as a matter of fact, there's a research article by that title. What English shall we speak? Because if you think about the different dialects and idioms that are out there, it's well, watch a TV show from the United Kingdom and compare the language that you hear there, or even Scotland. One of my favorite comedies is from Scotland, and if you don't understand it, it's, ooh, well, they're speaking English. They grew up speaking. So what English are we going to speak? So that becomes the challenge, and it's ever so much more than just the language. It is the communication effectiveness, not language fluency, because you can be very fluent in the language, but you still miss the subtleties.
There are nuances, right?
Yes.
Every
Yes.
place has their nuances, even if it's the same language.
Yes.
But more so if it's a different language.
Yes, very much so. So
and,
yes.
And for the benefit of our audience, can you help them understand what organizational culture is, how it's formed, regardless of the expatriation aspect, but in general, how cultures are formed, so that they can connect the dots between what you just said and organizational culture?
You betcha. Organizational culture is, it's that shared learning. And anytime you get two people together, you're going to create a culture. And so the culture is what gets rewarded and what gets punished. And sometimes there's a big disconnect between, the stated values and the vision of a company. They might promote, hey, we've got great values here. But if you look at it, there was an organization that I used to work for that they promoted, hey, we take care of the customer, but their actions were contrary to that, and they got in some big trouble. So the
spirit and the letter were kind of different.
Yep, very much different. And one of my favorite authors, Edgar Schein, on organizational culture, he identifies the difference between the espoused values, what we like to say that we believe is true, and then the basic underlying assumptions. And the basic underlying assumptions is how we actually do things. So yes, we make a big deal out of our vision and values. However, in actuality, not so much. So that's why it's very, very important that there is congruency between, what the espoused values and the basic underlying assumptions. You'll also get, as part of a sub part of organizational cultures, is the climate. And I like to think of that as like the microclimate that exists, like in a rainforest, because the forest, or even in Iowa, we have a lot of corn, and the corn actually influences the weather because of transpiration. The moisture gets drawn up through the
Interesting.
plant, and it goes into the atmosphere, and so it actually influences the weather. Well, the same thing happens within an organization, because yes, you can have a great culture in one location, but going away from that, the impact of management is huge on culture, and so that will also affect the climate. So you can have a great culture, but the climate of a particular organization, or particular location, is not good because you've got poor leadership or poor management. So yeah.
This is a good segue to my next question. So we talked about organizational culture, and you define a little bit about that. So how tell me from your perspective, when we get the expatriates abroad in an international assignment, how they can instill the culture, the same cultural values from the headquarters, but at the same time adapt correctly in the local country, right?
You bet. Well, the first thing is the expat needs to have the trust of their boss.
Oh, yeah.
That's absolutely huge, because there are some things that in the local culture that don't align with the way things are done back home. I'm reminded of what happened in Brazil, with Henry Ford and Fordlandia back about 120 years ago. Ford bought a large, a huge tract of land, and wanted to open up a manufacture, or be able to develop rubber and wood for cars, and also open up a new market. Well, Henry Ford wanted to do things just the way he did them back in Michigan. Well, that didn't work well for the locals down in Brazil, because they don't work during the heat of the day like we
Yeah,
do here in the
absolutely.
United
It's
States.
over 100 degrees. It's
Just
not possible.
yeah, and it did, and Ford was not going to have anything to do with that. I don't care what temperature it is. We're going to do things just the way we did back in the United States. Well, if you can't appreciate and adapt the local culture, that's where the spirit of the organizational culture comes into play, because a lot of times it's like, well, we have a great work ethic, we're just not going to do it in the same way that they do back
Oh, so I
in
think
Michigan.
it sounds like you're saying you can keep your goals and you can keep your vision and your objective,
Yes.
but the way and the format of how things will be implemented or deployed might be different, and we have
Yes.
to adapt based on the localization.
Yes. As a matter of fact, I in one of my classes, my doc classes, I interviewed some expats, and I'm hoping that I can call upon their good nature again. And it was interesting that the differences in meetings, the time, the concept of time for some countries is not the same as in the United States. And so knowing that, I said, so how did you arrange that when you have a meeting with the bosses back in the United States, and you also have to have a meeting with your team down in Brazil? He says, well, what we do is I would always schedule the meeting for my local team. I'd do that first, and then I would ensure that there was enough time so that we could go through the small talk that was so very, very important,
Important. Mm-hmm.
that the relational dynamics of that. So then he would, if it was going to be an hour meeting, he would schedule his local meeting 3 hours ahead of the meeting with the US team. That way he knew everybody would be there. They would have,
that's smart. Yeah, I see a lot of leaders doing that. They have like a span for the entire meeting, and then they bring up the teams, depending on where the location is and how they need to have this relational aspect before. So so they basically they focus first on bringing the teams that are high context before, and then they schedule in the same meeting. It's the same meeting, but they say everyone from Brazil, Argentina, Mexico, they're going to be at 10 a.m. and people from Europe, for example, they're going to be at 10:30, and so they jump in. So I see a lot of people doing that nowadays.
Yep.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I think that's very, very important, and also understand, in the United States, we do a lot of, well, we're going to bring the whole team together and we're going to brainstorm. Well, that works well here, but it's also important to appreciate, expat managers need to appreciate that there are some cultures where the boss is, well, you're supposed to know that, and we don't brainstorm on that. That's just not how we do things. Okay, well, so you don't surprise people and say, hey, we're going to get together and we're going to brainstorm. No, what you do is you find out who the center of influence is, and then you say, your team is going to come up with some ideas on this. Let them work it out. Let them develop those ideas. Then when you come together, the manager can say, tell me what you have, so that you don't put people on the spot. And once again, it's it works great in the United States, but it doesn't
work
US.
in every place. That's true.
That's right.
And depending on the culture, sometimes it's not expected for you to say. You will wait until your manager says something, right? You don't voice your opinions depending on the culture. You wait for them, and if they ask you specifically, then you say something, right? So the dynamics in each country it's very different.
And that's where the cultural appreciation comes into play. It is, again, somebody, an expat going to a new country doesn't have to be, doesn't have to have a perfect understanding of that culture. What they do need to have is an appreciation that, guess what? It's different from the way you were raised. So take a step back, look, observe, listen, watch for those dynamics, and ask questions.
Absolutely. Ask questions is key. I agree, totally agree. Yeah. And not making assumptions too, right? Because sometimes it's so easy for us to make assumptions based on our perception of how things work in our home country, right?
Correct. Yes. And that's there are some cultures that they like to please, and so they will say, oh yes, we can do that, knowing full well that it's not
might
going
not
to
be
happen.
Possible.
Yeah, it's like, okay, well, but but if you understand that, and also it's like following up, that's considered a key management technique in the United States. Well, there are some cultures, like, well, over in Germany, you don't trust me? I told you that I was going to do that.
And in Germany, if you say something, you're committed to it, right? It's set in stone. If you said that, It's a done deal. And
Yeah.
if you doubt, they become really offended because
Yes.
it's very, very hard to see a German going back on their commitments, right? So yeah,
Yes.
so I totally agree. Yeah.
So that's, once again, it is, you know, communication effectiveness that, of please and thank you. I've traveled, for the military as well as personal travel, and I I learned two words or two phrases, and they're very important. Most people say, "Well, what's that? Go, where's the bathroom?" No, that it is please and thank you. How you say please and thank you are that opens so many doors. My experience in Germany, um, I never assumed that people knew how to speak English. My German is really bad, like terrible. But if you try and you say please and thank you and you try communicating, people, in Germany it was, oh, God love his American little heart. Let me help you out. Okay, thank you very much. But if people would take that attitude of I don't understand, and please help me, and
And
thank
you're
you.
making a genuine effort, right?
Yes,
you're really trying hard to interact and to understand and to be
yes,
open-minded.
yes. And you will learn, because when you show yourself to be friendly, people will reciprocate. I have yet to find myself in a situation where I I was not able to effectively communicate. And in some challenging places. After I retired, I went to Israel for a trip, and I was wearing my combat boots. Well, over in Israel, the Israeli Defense Forces they're on patrol, and you can tell the difference. Being a soldier, I could identify when they're on patrol, their weapons are loaded. And so I was getting out of the Dead Sea, and I had just taken a shower. I was getting dressed, and I was putting my combat boots on, and I I knew they were eyeballing me. They could see my combat boots, and I thought, uh-oh, okay. They are going to come up, and they're going to want to know, is what's going on here? Is this
What
guy
you're
a
doing
threat?
here?
Yeah, it's like,
What's
are
your
you a threat? Are
intentions?
you a threat? So, so I stood up, and it was a very non-threatening gesture. Had both my hands exposed, and I introduced myself. I said, um, "Sergeant First Class Retired Steve Douglas, United States Army." They saluted. They went their way. I went my way, and it was a wonderful exchange. Well, I knew that they were doing their job. Well, the same thing can apply for people when they go to a country. Know that it's people are going to look at you differently because you don't fit in. So, once again, if you have that cultural appreciation and learn a little bit about the history of the country before you go, I think that is paramount. And you don't have to go into a lot of in-depth history, but like Brazil, I want to go there someday. I really do. Um, if you understand how that it started off as a monarchy, and it transitioned very quickly because the people from Portugal were, the king and the queen, they were pretty much being run out of the country, so they moved to Brazil very quickly. Well, their people are going to establish a form of government that they're familiar with. Well, it's just that's continued. So it's understandable why there's a very it's very very hierarchical, and why there's a lot of structure to the way things are done. Well, that makes perfect sense to me. Now, I don't have to know all of the details, but I do know that if I go to Brazil and I want to, I'm working for a company and I want to have a particular, project. Well, I'm going to have to say, okay, so what do we need to do to make sure that we meet all of the criteria, meet all the local laws, but we're also able to accomplish what we need to get done. And that comes from that cultural appreciation. So very, very important.
Absolutely. And Steve, I'm curious to know, you started to talk a little bit about that in the beginning of the show. And I wanted to connect, go back to that topic. So how can companies help the expatriates, do their jobs in the foreign countries where they were assigned to?
You betcha. Well, the first thing is companies, if they start to, if the expat or the soon to be expat can start handing off their day-to-day responsibilities and then focus on the transition piece, moving from not finishing up a project 5 minutes before the jet door closes on their way to relocate down there. So let the job of the soon to be expat, let that be the transition down there.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, that's very important, and not many companies do that.
Yes.
And it's very, very challenging to the expatriate. They become really overwhelmed. There's so many things going on. They have to learn new things, how do a bunch of paperwork when they arrive. And yeah, absolutely. That's such a good point.
So, that helping in that transition. Also, intercultural training is important. I really think that it should, and this is just my opinion, it should focus on, once again, cultural appreciation and not necessarily culture specific, whatever country you're going to, because the expat and their family, they're going to learn that very, very quickly when they get down there. But to help them understand, it's going to be different than what you're used to. So pre-departure training, language, starting to learn the language, please and thank you, how to get to the hospital, where's the grocery store, conversations like that to help them in the process.
So support too, right? Like you're saying, having the support like in the military, because it's really indeed very helpful when we get to a new country. We don't know things. We don't even know. And that can become even more difficult when you don't know the language yet, or if you're going to a country where you don't have the regular alphabet. So for example, you go to China or you go to Japan, you cannot not even read a label, right?
Yes, quite so. And sometimes pictures can be misleading.
Yes.
So you can't always rely on that. So, and then that brings in another piece, and that is have a cultural ambassador, so that the expat, when they get down to the country, they are somebody that can fully appreciate that, yeah, this is going to be different for you, and somebody that you can confide in, and you can ask those questions of, it's like, boy, that doesn't seem, that doesn't make sense to me. Can you help me make sense of why this situation happens? The example that I'm thinking of, Jeitinho Brasileiro, from Brazil. Well, I did a little research on that, and depending upon your perspective, that can be kind of an enigma. It's like, okay, so it can be a good thing, it can be a bad thing. It just happens to have a label. Well, the same thing happens in other countries, of finding ways of navigating through the hierarchy,
rules and the authority.
Yeah, the rules. So to have someone that you can say, so help me understand this. Boy, it doesn't seem like it's a one size fits all definition. So help me understand what's going on here. So cultural ambassador is just very, very important because you
I
need to have,
agree. Yeah.
because there are some times where, you know, expats, regardless of the country they're from, when they're in that new environment, they're going to say something or do something that they don't inadvertently, they, you know, it can be a source of embarrassment. So to help reduce that, and then the associated anxiety that goes along with that.
True, that's very true. Yeah.
So,
And they
so
become more and more anxious if they see, you know, things are different, or people reacted differently. They don't know what's going on, and they don't have
yes,
who to ask about that, right? That
yeah,
really becomes a source of anxiety. That's true.
yes. And they're, you know, they're standing in front of a group of people and everybody's looking and pointing at them. It's like, I, you know, and if they understood the language, it would be, oh my gosh, I can't believe he or she just said that. It's like, ooh, yeah, that would be embarrassing. And, you know, you've got enough of a challenge as it is anyways. And I'm, you know, now I'm just specifically focusing on the job. You know, there's also the dynamics of what happens when you get home and you have your family with you. There are some extra dynamics there. So a cultural ambassador can also help with that. And then the last piece is the reintegration piece, which I think is absolutely huge, because here you have, you know, an expat has put their life on hold, and they have had to put relationships on hold. And so now they're reintegrating, and there's going to be a culture shock. There's going to be a culture shock when you get to the new country, and there's going to be a culture shock when you get
In
back
the
to your home
repatriation.
country.
Yeah.
Yes, so it's, you know, that reintegration piece is very, very important. So, you know, making sure that there's an assignment for, you know, the expat when they come back, you know, knowing and being secure in that, and also having a, you know, having a bit of grace, and you know, extend, you know, helping, you know, that expat when it's like, yeah, I appreciate that it's not the same as what you experienced when you were, you know, in the other country. And so, you know, helping them with, you know, that transition back into.
Does this
So
happen also in the military when you are being repatriated to your country? That sort of, you know, transition phase, that, you know, or that
yes,
doesn't.
yes, there is, because usually when somebody is, when they've finished their overseas assignment, they come home and they have, the chances are they have a lot of leave built up. And so they're going to use that leave time and they're going to come back and transition. But also something to consider, um, in the military, the culture, you know, the military culture stays with you, and it's pretty much the same whether you're in the United States
Oh, I see.
or you're outside of the United States. So you still have that that wonderful framework that helps you in your transition. The real challenge, and I can speak to this, but and that is when you retire and you leave that culture. So, you know, that's a challenge. But within the military itself, you always have that. And there are other people that can appreciate, because, you know, you can say, yeah, hey, I just PCS, the permanent changes station. I just PCS from Germany, or I just PCS from Italy. And there's going to be somebody in the unit that has gone through that transition. And they're going to go, oh man, yeah, that's kind of different, isn't it? And so there are a lot more cultural ambassadors, if you will,
Oh, I see.
that you can
And
de-escalate with.
it's such a good cultural element to have an ambassador. I think it's,
Yes,
I mean, I know you're probably suggesting this as the way of the support for the expatriate based on your experience with the military, but I think it's so brilliant. I think it's it can be even better than the training per se, because,
yes,
you know, you help with that experiential learning.
yes, most definitely. And you know, when you're learning a language, it's best to be immersed in the language. A friend of mine from a long, long time ago, when I was a young soldier, was telling me he learned German by the 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 German language program that the Army puts you through so that you can have a functional understanding. But also, he said, I watched nothing but German television and listened to nothing but German radio, and
And this
I
helps a lot.
spoke.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. And that way you can pick up the subtleties and the nuances of the
And
language.
terms too, local
Yes,
terms and idioms.
yes. And that to me is very, very important, because when the expat comes back, those experiences that they've had are just tremendous. I mean, they really can benefit an organization, because they're going to benefit the expat because they've had that experience. And the wonderful thing is, they've done some stuff that people only dream of. It's
True.
like
Yeah. So
I was,
yeah, and so you're saying that people in the military talk with each other, right? I think
yes,
we could do this also in the corporations after the assignment is over.
yes,
People could share their experiences, just like we're doing right now. They could do it
yes,
in their companies too, and help other people. Although they were not there in the assignment, they will learn from that, right? With the
yes,
conversation.
yes. As a matter of fact, when I was um, I met one individual from the company that I'm hoping to work in with my dissertation, and I said, "Who else do you know that I can talk to?" He says, "Oh." He says, the expat community in this company is very, very, it's very, very close. Everybody knows who's been overseas, and it's like perfect. So I would encourage those that have been, expats, find somebody that they can share with, because when you try to share an experience with a family member that wasn't there, it's there's no frame of reference for them. And that, the same thing happens in the military, because it's like, we've had experiences that a lot of people can only dream about. Well, it's like you have to explain the details of it, and it misses something in the translation. But if you can share that with somebody and say,
And the
here's,
stories, right?
oh yeah, it's like, oh, you know what, I had something very similar happen to me when I was. And that's how you can
And people start
reacclimate
to
yourself.
relate, right? They start to
Yes,
relate and connect the dots.
yes. Plus also that, that expat experience, when it comes time for the next merger and acquisition, they are better adapt at helping the company with that, and for it to be successful. Even if it was I was in Luxembourg, but now we just merged with a company in Japan. Okay, well, the language is definitely going to be different. However, the experiences of being an expat and being in a different culture, you don't have that awkwardness. I mean, you're going into a strange land, literally. Well, in the military, that's, they help us in that particular area, where you go into it, you're in a strange place when you go through basic training anyways. So you get used to that. So you can look at it and go, yeah, I'm in a strange place, but I acknowledge that it's strange, it's different, but I've got a job to do. And so that same thing can happen on that next expat assignment, where it's like, I've been in a different culture before, and that part isn't, that's not freaking me out. So, I can, let's do what we have to do, and enjoy the new dynamics of the new culture that you're experiencing.
That's brilliant. That's yeah. And my last question to you, Steve, is basically to summarize our talk today. What do you think could be some elements of organizational culture that a company has to have to be successful when assigning expatriates abroad, to to manage new teams, to manage new regions, etc.?
You betcha. Have a very, very clear understanding of what it is the organization wants to accomplish with their new team. And that needs to start off first and foremost. There also needs to be that inclusion of the new team, and that's where the expat manager can come in and help. They're bringing in the understanding of, well, here's how we do things back at the head office. That's wonderful. Okay. They also that expat manager needs to fully appreciate that, no, you can't do it the same way, but because we have that clear mission of, the clear understanding of here's what our expected outcomes are, then the expat manager can, should have the latitude to be able to say, okay, we want to get this accomplished. This is how we have to do it here in this country.
Let's try it this way here. Yeah.
Yes. And then the expat manager has to have the trust of the headquarters. That's just absolutely essential. Knowing that it's not going to be as simple as you like to think it's going to be. Managing diverse teams isn't anything new. If you look at, throughout history, there's like the Dutch East India Company, setting aside any thoughts of, how good or bad. If you just look at it from that perspective, the Dutch East India Company, the same way with the British East India Company. Anytime you have a dispersed workforce, there has to be a level of trust, and there has to be an understanding of, it's not going to be how you think it is at that location. There needs to be a certain amount of latitude and adjustment, and that comes from having an expat manager that understands how the culture operates, and then is given the latitude and the grace to be able to do their job while, based upon the spirit of the organizational culture, but based upon the reality of the host nation
where
culture.
they are. And
Yes.
and in that sense, it sounds almost like you were saying, in other words, well, if the headquarter usually has that culture of micromanaging, then that's not gonna cut it, right?
That's right. Yes, it's going to have to be less hands-on managerial experiences. Yes, because there are, even though you can communicate over great distances at different time zones. Once again, it is, if I were the manager at the headquarters, as soon as I were to hang up from that phone call, I'm going to go home to my house and I'm going to read, U.S. road signs. I'm going to, going into my U.S. built house with all my, all of the stuff
you're
that I
in the
have.
comfort zone, right?
Yeah.
You're still in your comfort zone, while the expat is not, right?
The expat is going to drive down, they're going to drive down streets that they know how to navigate, but it's different than what they've experienced when they grew up. And they're going to interact with people that English probably is not their first language, and so they're going to have to they're going to have to translate what they say in English. They're going to have to run that through there, fill in the name of the country, the Portuguese, or and not just any Portuguese, Brazilian Portuguese, or we're in Portugal, so we're going to speak that that dialect. I'm in the United Kingdom, so I'm speaking United Kingdom English or Scottish. So you have to run that through your filter, before it comes out of your mouth, and that's going to, that can just be absolutely exhausting.
That's true, yeah.
That's where, so when you factor all of those things in, that's where the grace and the latitude for the expat manager, that's where that
helpful.
really comes in. Yes. Mm-hmm. Because they've got a lot on their plate other than just trying to be productive. So
Absolutely. No, that's brilliant. So I love everything you shared with us today. Steve, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences, sharing your knowledge, sharing the stories that you had. So thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you.
well, thank you for having me. I very much appreciate it. And, please, anybody that wants to reach out to me, I'd be more than happy to talk with you, share my knowledge, and
I will leave
thank you.
Steve's LinkedIn below in the description if you guys want to contact him. Thank you so much, Steve.
Thank you.
Hey, I want to tell you one more thing. You are a global leader. The question is, do you have all the skills that you need to succeed? I'd love to help. I save my very best tips for my subscribers. Subscribe for free at coachingexpatriates.com. I know your inbox is sacred, so I promise I will send you emails that you will love. Wow, that was such an educational conversation. I really enjoy these conversations and I hope you do too. If you like this episode today, please give me a like, share it with your friends, comment below, and consider subscribing to a channel. Hit the bell so that you can be notified when we have new things up. Thank you so much for watching.